Their ultimatum was a mirror, and humanity was about to show them their own reflection. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the fleet carrier Balance, her form a study in stillness amidst the controlled chaos. On the main view screen, the gas giant Janus 6 swirled in magnificent blues and golds, a silent god witnessing a standoff that would define this quadrant for a generation. Docked to the planet's orbital ring, a sprawling convoy of 74 civilian transports hung like jewels on a thread, holding over 2 million souls who had trusted the 12th Expeditionary Fleet with their lives. Opposite them, dark and brutalist against the stellar backdrop, floated the Cathar Imperium's 3rd Subjugation Fleet, spearheaded by the Dreadnought Vindicator. Their message delivered an hour ago had been stripped of all diplomatic subtlety. Surrender the colonists for benevolent integration, or face total annihilation. Everyone knew what their integration meant. A crimson hololith pulsed at the corner of the screen, a monument to their arrogance. It read 005912. Report. Rostova said, her voice calm and level, cutting through the low hum of the bridge's life support and the faint scent of ozone from the tactical displays. Commander Jian Li stepped forward, his posture rigid. Cathar Fleet remains in a static delta formation, Admiral. All primary weapon apertures are open. They are broadcasting their ultimatum on all pan-galactic frequencies, citing our unlawful trespass and theft of pre-designated resettlement assets. They call people assets, Rostova murmured, a flicker of ice in her eyes. She turned to the air beside her, where the fleet mine's avatar, a simple column of shimmering blue light, pulsed in time with its core processes. Lyceum. Your final assessment. The synthesized voice of Lyceum was serene, a stark contrast to the tension coiling in the room. The calculus is unchanged, Admiral. Direct kinetic engagement results in an 81.4% probability of total fleet loss and a 99.7% probability of convoy destruction. The Cathar Dreadnought's main cannon has an energy yield that exceeds the combined shield capacity of this entire fleet. Their ultimatum doctrine is predicated on this mathematical certainty. They built their empire on math that never accounted for us. A young ensign at the communications console swallowed hard, her knuckles white where she gripped her station. On her personal monitor, a low-bandwidth feed from the Transport Horizon's Promise showed a crowded common area. A father was holding his daughter up to a viewport, pointing out the distant protective shapes of the 12th Fleet. The little girl waved a small, hopeful gesture across the void. The stakes were not numbers. They were sleeping children and whispered dreams. Rostova's gaze softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. Their certainty is their weakness. They expect us to break or to charge. They have no protocol for a target that refuses both. She looked at Li. Are all elements in position for the solstice maneuver? Confirmed, Admiral Li responded, tapping a command into his datapad. The Janus lattice is deployed and stable. Decoy drones are spooled and mirroring our primary signatures. The convoy captains have acknowledged their final vector coordinates. They believe they have us trapped in a gravity well, Rostova said, her voice resonating with a quiet authority that settled the nerves of the bridge crew. They see a simple equation of mass and energy. They forgot to carry the one. Lyceum's light column flickered. The Cathar have hailed us again, Admiral. The Imperator of the 3rd Fleet. Dexlar wishes to speak with you personally. He states it is your final opportunity to embrace logic. On screen, Rostova ordered. The view of the enemy fleet was replaced by the reptilian face of a Cathar commander. His scales were a dull, polished obsidian, and his eyes were unblinking reptilian slits that held a deep, ancient contempt. He sat on a throne of jagged metal, the bridge of the Vindicator visible behind him, a place of stark function and zero artistry. Human Admiral Dexlar's voice grated from the speakers, a deep rumble of condescension. "Your time runs short. Your fleet is a splinter against my hammer. Your civilian charges are a liability you cannot defend. Acknowledging defeat is not dishonor. It is an acceptance of reality. We will grant your crews passage if you stand down now." Rostova met his gaze without flinching. Her own bridge was bathed in the warm light of human-centric design, a place of collaboration, not domination. Imperator, your reality is built on a flawed premise. You assume the weak must always yield to the strong. A low hiss, the Cathar equivalent of a laugh, escaped him. That is not a premise. It is a law of the universe. We were here to teach a new law. There are other laws. Rostova countered, her voice dangerously soft. The law of unintended consequences. The law of reciprocal action. You have issued your ultimatum. Now you will receive our answer. She gestured to the communications officer. "Cut the channel." Dexlar's face vanished, replaced once more by the cold, hard numbers of the countdown. Or 2741. The bridge was silent save for the faint hum of the inertial dampeners adjusting to micro-vibrations from the ship's fusion core. Commander Lee Rostova said, turning her back to the screen. "Execute Solstice on my mark. Lieutenant Sharma, prepare the overture. I want the Cathar sensor arrays screaming." "Aye, Admiral," came the crisp replies. Lyceum's avatar pulsed gently. "Admiral, the emotional state of the convoy passengers is trending towards panic. Biofeedback from their local networks is high." "Pipe my voice to them," Rostova commanded without hesitation. "All vessels fleet-wide." A green light blinked on her command console. She drew a steadying breath. "This is Admiral Rostova of the FCV Balance. To the citizens of the New Dawn convoy, and to the women and men of the 12th Fleet. In a few moments we will be executing a series of complex maneuvers. You will see weapons fire. You will feel your ships accelerate. Do not be alarmed. This is not a battle for survival." She paused, letting the words sink in across dozens of ships and millions of souls. "This is a lesson in perspective. Hold fast. Trust the math. Trust each other." She was asking them to trust in a miracle of physics. The countdown hit 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the Cathar would unleash a wave of energy that could crack a continent. Rostova watched the tactical display where friendly and enemy icons were poised like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. The Cathar formation was a perfect, rigid spearhead designed to punch through any conventional defense. They had used it 100 times, and it had never failed. It was the physical manifestation of their doctrine, overwhelming, direct, and utterly without imagination. "They're not adjusting their posture at all," Lieutenant Anya Sharma observed from the sensor station, her brow furrowed. "Their energy signatures are building, but they remain locked in that delta. It's like they've already declared victory and are just waiting for the clock." "Doctrine is a fortress for the mind," Lieutenant Rostova said. "It keeps out new ideas. It also keeps its occupants prisoner. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." The old Academy mantra echoed in her mind. This was the core of their mandate, the principle that separated the Terran Confederation from empires like the Cathar. They did not conquer. They educated. Sometimes the lessons had to be sharp. A new sensory input filtered through the bridge, a low-frequency vibration that hummed up through the deck plates. It wasn't the thrum of their own engines, but a faint, almost subliminal resonance from across the void. It was the sound of the Vindicator's main cannon charging its primary capacitors, a promise of imminent, overwhelming violence. The air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation. 5 minutes, Lee announced, his voice tight. Rostova nodded. Lyceum confirmed the lattice alignment. The Janus lattice is oriented and awaiting a signal, the AI replied. All 1.7 million reflector nodes are reporting optimal cohesion. The civilian vessels have maneuvered into their final anchor positions, their movements masked as panicked dispersal. That was the first piece of the puzzle. For the past hour, several large transports had been making small, seemingly random burns, drifting away from the main convoy. To the Cathar, it looked like fear, a few rats trying to flee a sinking ship. But each movement had been precise, guided by Lyceum's calculations, positioning the ships as the outermost anchors for a net the Cathar couldn't even see. The lattice itself, composed of microscopic self-orienting mirrors, deployed weeks ago under the cover of a solar flare, was all but invisible to conventional sensors. A mystery written in empty space. 2 minutes, Lee's voice was a blade. Begin the overture, Rostova ordered. Sharma's fingers danced across her console. Broadcasting now, pushing ghost signatures and wide-spectrum interference across all Cathar fire control frequencies. Across the void, the battle began not with a bang, but with a scream of static. Hundreds of false energy signatures blossomed on the Cathar sensor screens, each one mimicking a human warship. Decoy drones, cold and silent, until now ignited their drives and blazed across the darkness, perfectly replicating the heat and electromagnetic output of the 12th Fleet's cruisers and destroyers. They were fighting shadows, and the shadows were winning. On the Vindicator's bridge, Dexler watched his tactical display bloom with targets. He sneered, a child's trick. All units target the largest signatures. Fire at will when the clock expires. Let them waste their fuel on these pathetic games. His doctrine was clear: ignore feints, crush the center of mass. The final 60 seconds crawled by, each tick of the clock, a hammer blow against the silence. Rostova stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the tactical plot. She saw the Cathar targeting indicators lock onto the decoy fleet. She saw the real convoy, protected by the sudden storm of electronic noise, begin its gentle, calculated drift toward the escape vector. 10 seconds, Lee counted down. 9, 8. The bridge of the balance was preternaturally quiet. The only sound was the whisper of the ventilation and the soft chime of consoles confirming their readiness. 3, 2, 1. The countdown timer vanished. Mark Rostova said, her voice cutting the silence. Execute. The universe outside the view screen erupted. The Cathar fleet unleashed its volley, a torrent of incandescent energy lancing across the darkness. Beams of pure particle force, each capable of vaporizing an asteroid, converged on the ghost fleet. The decoys, having served their purpose, died in silent, brilliant flashes of light, their destruction a spectacular, meaningless light show. But the greatest light show was yet to come. Simultaneously, the 74 civilian transports and the warships of the 12th Fleet engaged their main drives. Not toward the enemy, but away on a trajectory that seemed to be a full, panicked retreat. It was a perfectly choreographed burn designed to draw the Cathar forward into the heart of the kill box they didn't know they were entering. They've taken the bait, Sharma reported, her voice laced with a triumphant tremor. Their secondary batteries are firing on the convoy's escape path. And the Vindicator, its main cannon is cycling for a second shot. They're targeting us, Admiral, the real fleet, as predicted, Lyceum stated calmly. Their doctrine demands the elimination of the primary military threat before subjugating the civilians. They are moving to intercept, Estimated time to optimal firing solution 90 seconds. That's more than we need, Rostova said. Lee are our guests in position, locked in the center of the web. Admiral Lee confirmed, a grim smile touching his lips. They are perfectly bracketed. The Cathar fleet surged forward, a wave of confident, brutal power. They saw a fleeing, broken enemy. They registered the human fleet's rising heat signatures as a desperate final gambit. Their sensors, still struggling with Sharma's electronic ghosts, gave them a clean enough firing solution on the Balance and its escorts. The Vindicator's massive forward spine began to glow again, a terrible growing intensity that lit up the void. Dexlar watched his human counterpart flee. It was precisely as his tactical manuals had described. The lesser races always broke. Target their flagship, he commanded. Make an example of their defiance. He was about to become the example. Admiral Lyceum's voice was devoid of inflection, yet it carried an immense weight. The Vindicator is at maximum charge. Its energy output is 105% of predicted models. They are pouring everything into this single shot. Let them, Rostova said softly. Her eyes were on the main screen where the Cathar Dreadnought was a figure of terrible power. They believe this is an execution. They fail to understand the nature of the sentence. She raised her voice to a command tone. Lyceum, open the ledger. Acknowledged, the AI replied. Activating the Janus lattice. Angle of incidence is locked. Reflective coefficient is at 99.8%. Across millions of kilometers of space, 1.7 million microscopic mirrors, each no larger than a grain of sand, received their final command. They pivoted in perfect unison, guided by a single, impossibly complex algorithm. In less than a second, they formed a vast, invisible, parabolic mirror, its focal point aimed not at the Vindicator's armored prow, but at its exposed and unshielded engine section. The Vindicator fired. A beam of stellar energy, a literal spear of sunfire, crossed the distance in an instant. It was a weapon designed to end fleets, to shatter worlds. It struck the exact point in space where the human fleet had been moments before. And then it hit the Janus lattice. The universe held its breath. For a microsecond, the beam seemed to vanish, swallowed by the void. But it hadn't vanished. It had been caught, turned, and focused. The entire annihilating force of the Cathar's ultimate weapon was gathered into a single needle-thin lance of its own fury and returned to sender. The light that struck the Vindicator was its own magnified and perfected. The Cathar Dreadnought didn't explode. It was surgically dismantled. The returned beam sliced through the ship's aft section, vaporizing engine pods, severing primary power conduits, and flash-boiling coolant systems. A wave of secondary explosions blossomed along its spine as power relays overloaded. The brilliant light of its main cannon died, starved of energy. The ship went dark, a massive, crippled hulk, venting plasma and atmosphere into the vacuum. Its forward momentum carried it onward, a dead thing tumbling through space. The rest of the Cathar fleet faltered, their confident advance turning into a chaotic scramble. The same lattice that had crippled their flagship now began to play a symphony of destruction with their secondary weapons. Laser bolts from their cruisers struck the mirrors and were flung back at their own emitters. Plasma torpedoes were redirected into the paths of their sister ships. Their own strength was the hammer that broke them. On the bridge of the Balance, no one cheered. They watched the silent, terrible beauty of the trap unfolding with a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. The glare from the reflected beams was so intense that the view screen had to polarize to its darkest setting, yet the actinic light still painted stark shadows across the crew's faces. Report. Rostova ordered, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. Vindicator is disabled, Lee said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Catastrophic damage to all propulsion and primary power systems. I'm reading multiple hull breaches. The rest of their fleet. They're in chaos. They've ceased all offensive fire. They're trying to understand what just happened. Kost Rostova demanded. The frigate Steadfast was caught in the splash from a redirected beam, Sharma reported, her expression sobering. Shields buckled. We have reports of atmospheric venting in Engineering Section 4 and 3 wounded, no fatalities. They are containing the breach now. The smell of burnt ozone seemed to sharpen in the recycled air, a reminder that even a perfect plan has a price. Rostova nodded, her jaw tight. A cost had been paid. It was noted. It would be remembered. Lyceum, what is the status of the Cathar fleet's command structure? Indeterminate, the AI replied. The Vindicator is dark. We are detecting panicked, contradictory transmissions on their internal comms. No fleet-wide orders are being issued. Their vaunted doctrine did not include a protocol for this. Their book had no chapter for reckoning. The 12th Fleet, having completed its feigned retreat, now pivoted. The hunters had become the wardens. Destroyers and cruisers moved to encircle the shattered, confused Cathar force, their own weapons, now charged and ready. The civilian convoy was already well on its way to the safe jump point, their passage now guaranteed. The first part of the mission was complete. But the lesson was not over. Open a channel to the Vindicator, Rostova commanded. All frequencies. I want every ship in their fleet to hear this. The comms officer nodded, her earlier fear replaced by a steely resolve. Channel open, Admiral. There was no image from the crippled Dreadnought, only the hiss of open channel static. Rostova stepped forward, her boots making no sound on the deck. She stood before the main view screen, which now showed the broken Cathar fleet adrift and helpless. This is Admiral Rostova of the Terran Confederation Fleet Carrier Balance. She began, her voice calm, clear, and utterly uncompromising. To the commander of the Cathar Third Fleet. An hour ago, you presented us with an ultimatum based on your perception of strength. You were mistaken. She paused, letting the silence stretch a weapon in itself. Your weapon was formidable, but its power was absolute, and you believed that was enough. You failed to account for its trajectory. You failed to account for its target. And you failed to account for the consequences of its use. Every choice is a debt, and every debt must be paid. Your fleet is crippled. Your flagship is adrift. Your doctrine of coercion has failed. You believed you were writing the terms of our surrender. Instead, you have become a footnote in a lesson you are about to learn. She took a breath, the weight of 2 million saved lives and 3 wounded crew members settling on her shoulders. The arc of her purpose, once bent toward restraint, was now forged into a point of righteous, undeniable decision. The Cathar only understood one language. It was time to speak it fluently. You demanded we submit to your ledger. Now you will face ours. We are transmitting our terms to you now. You will stand down all remaining weapons systems and prepare to be boarded. You will transmit on an open channel to your own Imperium a full and public accounting of your failure here today. You will acknowledge that your ultimatum doctrine is a strategic liability. A new countdown clock appeared on the view screen, this one in cool, calm blue. It was not a clock for destruction, but for compliance. It started at 10 minutes. This is not a negotiation, Rostova concluded, her voice as cold and clear as interstellar space. This is the bill come due. You have 10 minutes to begin your payment. Their silence was the only answer she needed. On the crippled bridge of the Vindicator, Dexlar stood amidst the wreckage. Sparks rained down from shattered conduits, and the air was thick with the acrid smoke of burnt electronics. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. His throne was a twisted wreck. His crew looked at him, their ancient arrogance shattered, replaced by a new, terrifying emotion, doubt. The human's voice echoed from the emergency speakers, each word a spike driven into his pride. The blue countdown on his own damaged holodisplay was a mockery of the crimson one he had broadcast with such confidence. He had held the hammer. Now his head was on the anvil. His second-in-command, a younger Cathar with scales the color of rust, approached him. "Imperator, what are your orders? Our long-range comms are down. Our engines are slag. The outer fleet is awaiting your command. But they are afraid." Dexler stared at the screen at the human fleet that now held them in a cage of their own making. He had followed the doctrine. He had applied overwhelming force. The math had been correct, but the answer was wrong. The humans had not just defied his ultimatum. They had turned it into a weapon against him. They had used his own fist to break his own jaw. This wasn't war. It was education. The first lesson is that you are not the only teacher. Their ships are undamaged, the sub-commander stammered, his voice betraying his shock. They defeated a subjugation fleet without taking a single meaningful loss. How Dexlar didn't answer. He was replaying the last few minutes, trying to comprehend the tactical flip. The decoys, the electronic warfare, the convoy's strange dispersal. It had all been a performance, a grand piece of stagecraft, to maneuver his fleet into the perfect position for a single decisive counterstroke. They hadn't used a superweapon. They had used his. The blue clock ticked down. 0008:14. Imperator, his subordinate pressed. "We must respond. We can order the outer cruisers to attack. They might be able to break the encirclement." With what Dexler hissed rounding on him. They saw what happened to the Vindicator. They know the humans have a weapon that can turn our power against us. An attack would be suicide. They would be firing into a mirror. A mirror. That's what the human admiral had said. Her words now echoed with a terrible clarity. A law of reciprocal action. She had told him exactly what she was going to do, and his own arrogance had prevented him from hearing it. The deep thrum of the Balance's ready weapons systems vibrated through the Vindicator's wounded frame, a constant patient reminder of their new reality. He was trapped not just by an enemy fleet, but by the failure of his entire worldview. The Cathar Imperium was built on the simple truth that might makes right. For centuries, it had been an unassailable axiom. Now, a race of soft-skinned mammals from a backwater arm of the galaxy had presented him with a terrifying new theorem. And it was written in the ruins of his ship. Meanwhile, on the Balance, the mood was one of tense vigilance. The trap had sprung perfectly, but the most dangerous animal is a cornered one. Rostova watched the tactical display, her expression unreadable. "Lyceum analyze their internal communications," she ordered. "What is their emotional state?" "Panic is subsiding, replaced by confusion and systemic paralysis," the AI reported. "The chain of command is broken. The sub-commanders of the fleet are requesting orders from Dexlar, but he is not responding. Their doctrine has no contingency for a decapitation of command and control while the commander is still alive." "He's thinking," Rostova said. "He's weighing the cost of compliance against the cost of defiance. There is no logical reason to defy," Lyceum stated. "Defiance results in a 100% probability of fleet destruction. Compliance results in survival, albeit with severe political and personal consequences for their commander." Jian Li scoffed. "Logic doesn't have much to do with Cathar pride. Dexlar would rather die than admit he was outmaneuvered." Perhaps Rostova conceded, but his crew may not agree. Pride doesn't keep you warm in the cold of space. She was counting on the crew to value their lives over their doctrine. She instructed Sharma single out the Cathar cruisers on the perimeter. The ones that are still fully operational. Transmit a data packet to them, and only them. "What's in the packet?" Admiral Sharma asked. "A replay," Rostova said. "A sensor log from the Janus lattice showing exactly how the Vindicator's own energy was used to cripple it, and include a projection of what will happen to their ships if they attempt to fire their main weapons. Use their own energy yield calculations against them. Show them the math. Let them see the receipt for a war they can't win." "Aye, Admiral. Sending the lesson plan now." It was a subtle but powerful tool to divide the Cathar commander from his own fleet. Dexlar could order them to fight, but he could not force them to ignore the truth presented on their own screens. Rostova wasn't just defeating an enemy. She was dismantling their certainty, one data point at a time. The scent of victory was in the air, but it was a sterile metallic scent, like the air after a lightning strike. It was the smell of a problem solved, not a people conquered. The countdown reached 3 minutes. On the bridge of the Cathar cruiser, Unflinching Will, Captain Cavrel watched the human data packet unfold on his main screen. He saw the invisible lattice. He saw the calculations that showed with terrifying precision how his own ship's primary cannon would become the instrument of its own demise. He saw the trap not as a mystery, but as a solved equation. His communications officer turned to him, his scales pale with stress. "Imperator Dexlar is issuing a fleet-wide command. He is ordering a coordinated attack. He calls the human's weapon a one-time trick. He is ordering us to fire on his mark." Cavrel looked at the tactical display. He saw the human fleet holding its position with an unnerving calm. He saw his crippled flagship, a tomb of ambition. Then he looked again at the human's calculations. They were flawless. He was being ordered to commit suicide for the sake of one male's pride. "Hold our fire," Cavrel commanded, his voice a low growl, "and transmit my decision to the other cruiser captains. Inform them that the Unflinching Will not be participating in a ritual sacrifice." The mutiny was quiet, professional, and absolute. It spread from ship to ship in seconds. The cruiser captains, faced with the undeniable mathematics of their own destruction, chose survival. The Cathar fleet, already physically broken, was now shattered in spirit and command. On the Vindicator, Dexlar saw the refusals flood his command console. One by one, his captains were choosing to disobey a direct order. The foundations of his world were not just cracking, they were crumbling into dust. His ultimatum had resulted in his own fleet holding him hostage. The blue clock on his screen showed 1 minute remaining. The human admiral had not just defeated him, she had taught him the true meaning of powerlessness. A low, mournful chime echoed through the bridge of the balance. Admiral Lyceum announced, "We are receiving a transmission from the Vindicator. It is an audio-only channel. It's Imperator Dexlar." On speakers, Rostova said, her posture unwavering. The voice that came through was not the arrogant, condescending rumble from before. It was a ragged, broken thing, heavy with the weight of absolute defeat. "Human, you have won. We accept your terms." The hammer had finally confessed it was made of glass. A collective silent exhalation seemed to pass through the bridge of the balance. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed from the sharp, brittle pressure of imminent combat to the heavy, dense weight of consequence. Dexlar's broken voice still hung in the air, an epitaph for his own arrogance. Rostova allowed herself a single slow blink. The first part of the bill had been paid. Now came the collection. "Commander Lee," she said, her voice betraying no hint of triumph. "Assemble a primary contact team. Helmets on sidearms only. I want you on the Vindicator's bridge in 30 minutes. Your mission is to secure the command staff and verify their compliance with our terms. You are to proceed with the assumption that this is a trick until you have confirmed otherwise with your own eyes. Admiral Lee acknowledged a flicker of grim satisfaction in his expression. He turned and strode from the bridge, his magnetic boots clicking with purpose on the deck plating. Lieutenant Sharma began a rolling scan of the entire Cathar fleet. I want a full accounting of their power-down process. Monitor every weapon port, every energy signature, every reactor fluctuation. If so much as a targeting laser flickers to life, I want to know about it before the photons leave the emitter. Scanning now, Admiral, cross-referencing their energy states with their pre-surrender posture. Sharma's fingers were a blur across her console, her focus absolute. The scent of hot electronics and recycled air was sharp, a constant reminder of the thin metal shell that held the void at bay. The accounting had begun, and every entry would be checked. Rostova turned to the shimmering column of light that was her fleet mind. Lyceum, open a secure channel to the convoy. Let them know the immediate threat is neutralized. Reassure them, but tell them to maintain their course and speed for the jump point. This is not over until they are safely away. Acknowledged, Admiral. The relief among the passengers will be significant. On the civilian transport Stellar Cradle, a medical bay that had been prepped for mass casualties, was now a scene of quiet, tearful relief. A medic, a young woman with stress lines etched around her eyes, leaned against a bulkhead, her knees weak. She watched a news feed on a wall-mounted monitor, showing the Cathar fleet now dark and silent. Moments ago, she had been preparing to receive hundreds of burn victims. Now she was watching history unfold. Her personal datapad chimed with a message from the fleet: immediate threat neutralized. Maintain course. You are safe. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you to the distant, unseen guardians of the 12th Fleet. Their vigilance was the shield that kept millions safe. Commander Lee's shuttle, the Negotiator, sliced through the debris field between the two fleets. The wreckage of the Cathar's own redirected munitions glittered like shattered obsidian in the light of the distant star. Through the forward viewport, the Vindicator loomed, a vast, wounded beast of a ship. Its hull was scarred and blackened where its own power had turned on it. Entire sections were dark, and a slow, almost lazy trail of frozen atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. It was a tomb broadcasting a warning. 5 minutes to docking, the pilot announced. Lee stood with his boarding team in the shuttle's cramped transport bay. They were a dozen men and women in lightweight vacuum suits, their faces grimly professional behind their polarized visors. The only sounds were the hum of the shuttle's life support and the soft rhythmic puff of their own breathing regulators. The air tasted of sterile, recycled oxygen. Remember the mission, Lee said, his voice crisp over their private comm channel. Secure the command staff, confirm their surrender. No heroics. We are here to witness their compliance, not to start another fight. Watch each other's backs. Let's go. They were walking into the heart of a defeated ideology. The shuttle docked with a soft clang at one of the Vindicator's auxiliary airlocks. The docking tube extended, and after a moment's hesitation, the Dreadnought's outer door hissed open. Lee's team moved through their weapons held in a low, ready position. The inside of the Cathar ship was a world of alien angles and oppressive martial design. Emergency lighting cast everything in a blood-red glow. The corridors were wider than a human's, built for larger frames. The air was cold, thin, and carried a strange metallic odor, like ozone and reptile musk. They met no resistance. A junior Cathar officer, his scales a sickly gray color, was waiting for them. He looked stunned, his movements slow and clumsy. He wordlessly gestured for them to follow. They moved through the ship's cavernous interior, past crew members, who simply stared as they passed, their expressions a mixture of shock and a deep, unsettling emptiness. Their arrogance, their defining cultural trait, had been burned out of them. Their doctrine hadn't just failed, it had been proven irrelevant. And for a people who defined their existence by a single rigid set of beliefs, the loss was total. They were a people who had lost their only God. The bridge was a scene of controlled devastation. Shattered displays hung from their mounts, and the air was thick with the haze of chemical fire suppressants. In the center of it all stood Imperator Dexlar. He was not on his throne. He stood beside its twisted remains, his posture stooped. The proud obsidian of his scales seemed dull under the emergency lights. He looked smaller. Lee and his team fanned out, securing the room. Lee himself walked forward, stopping a respectful but safe distance from the Cathar commander. He kept his helmet on his face, unreadable. Imperator Dexlar Lee said, his voice amplified by his suit's external speaker. "I am Commander Jian Lee of the Terran Confederation Fleet. I am here to confirm your surrender and witness the fulfillment of Admiral Rostova's terms." Dexlar slowly turned his head. His reptilian eyes, once filled with such burning contempt, were now clouded and distant. "Your admiral is thorough," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "The weapons are disarmed. The fleet is anchored. What more do you want?" The public accounting Lee stated, his tone unyielding. "As per the terms. You will broadcast your statement to your Imperium on an open channel as specified." A flicker of the old fire returned to Dexlar's eyes. A deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. For a moment, Lee's hand tightened on his sidearm. The bridge crew tensed. The air crackled with the new dangerous energy. The Cathar commander was a broken thing, but a broken thing could still be deadly. This was the moment the entire truce pivoted on. "You would humiliate me," Dexlar hissed. "You would have me announce my own shame to the galaxy." "We would have you tell the truth," Lee countered, his voice steady. "Your doctrine of ultimatums is a failure. It cost you your flagship and your fleet. The truth is not a humiliation. It is a data point. Your Imperium needs to hear it so that this lesson does not need to be repeated." He gestured to the communications console, which was still partially functional. "The universe is listening, Imperator. A great many people are waiting to learn what happens when an immovable object meets a force that has no intention of moving it, but every intention of showing it its own reflection." Dexlar stared at Lee, then at the faces of his own defeated crew. He saw the truth in their eyes. They had followed him to the edge of annihilation. He had demanded their absolute loyalty to a doctrine that had led them to this ruin. His pride was a small thing now, a flickering ember in the cold reality of their situation. He had already lost his fleet. He had already lost the battle. All he had left to lose was a future he could no longer see. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of the fight from him, he turned and strode to the console. "I will make the broadcast." The ledger's final entry was about to be written in the defeated's own hand. Back on the balance, they listened as Dexlar's voice, now stripped of all its former power, was transmitted across the quadrant. He spoke in the harsh, guttural language of the Cathar, but Lyceum provided a real-time translation on the main screen. He recounted the ultimatum he had issued. He described the tactical situation from his perspective, and then, his voice cracking with a shame that was audible even across the language barrier, he described how the human fleet had used his own weapon to defeat him. He ended with the required words, each one seemingly dragged from his soul. "The doctrine of absolute ultimatum has been proven a failure. I, Dexlar of the 3rd Subjugation Fleet, accept full responsibility. We have been outmaneuvered. We have been defeated." The transmission ended. Silence descended not just on the bridge of the balance, but likely on thousands of bridges and command centers across known space. A precedent had not just been set, it had been carved into the public record for all to see. "It is done," Rostova said quietly. She felt no joy, only a profound sense of grim finality. She had won. She had saved 2 million lives. But she had also been forced to break a man and an entire fleet's spirit to do it. The cost of victory was always paid on both sides of the line. A new alert suddenly chimed sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet moment. It was Sharma, her eyes wide. "Admiral, I'm detecting a massive tachyon surge at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts. They're Cathar moving fast. Very fast." Lee, having just returned to the bridge, swore under his breath. A response force. Already Lyceum's light column pulsed rapidly. Their velocity is extreme. They are not on a standard intercept course. They are on a vengeance vector. Based on their energy signatures, I can identify the flagship. It is the Retribution command vessel of the Cathar 1st Imperial Guard. They are not a subjugation fleet. They are an execution fleet. The air on the bridge went cold. An execution fleet had only one purpose: to erase disgrace. That meant destroying the disgraced Third Fleet and any witnesses. They had defeated the monster only to summon its bigger, angrier brother. Rostova's mind raced, processing the new terrifying reality. They were out of tricks. The Janus lattice had been a one-time gambit, its position now known. They were low on decoy drones. The civilian convoy was not yet clear of the system. A direct engagement with an Imperial Guard fleet was not just unwinnable, it was unthinkable. It would be a slaughter. "What is their ETA?" she demanded. 3 hours, Lyceum replied. "Their drive technology is significantly more advanced than that of the subjugation fleet." 3 hours, not enough time to run, not enough time to hide, not enough strength to fight. The familiar pressure of a countdown clock of an impossible choice settled back onto Rostova's shoulders, heavier than ever before. The conflict triangle was back sharp and unforgiving, her own moral line, which forbade abandoning the now helpless Cathar prisoners, against Lyceum's cold calculus, which would surely advise sacrificing them to save her own fleet. And against it all, the new, even more brutal ultimatum doctrine of the approaching Cathar. She looked at the tactical display. The icons of Dexlar's fleet were now colored a neutral blue, signifying their surrendered status. They were her responsibility now. They were prisoners under the Confederation's Articles of War. She could not abandon them. They remember by ledgers, never by collars, and certainly not by abandonment. Admiral Lee said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get the convoy out of here. We can use the disabled Cathar fleet to slow down the First Guard. A sacrificial screen." No, Rostova said, her decision instant and absolute. "We will not sacrifice prisoners. We will not adopt their tactics to defeat them. There must be another way." "The mathematics of the situation are grim," Admiral Lyceum stated, its calm voice a chilling counterpoint to the rising tension. "The probability of our survival against the First Guard in a direct confrontation is less than 1%. The probability of the convoy's survival is 0. "Then we change the equation," Rostova shot back, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. "We can't fight them with weapons. The lattice was a mirror for energy. What if we build them a mirror for their own doctrine?" She turned to Lee. "Get me Captain Cavrel of the Unflinching Will, the one who mutinied first. Get him on a secure channel. Now." A new mystery was seeded. What was Rostova's plan? It was a desperate gambit born in the face of impossible odds. She was no longer fighting a fleet. She was fighting a mindset, an entire culture of violence, and she was going to have to use her prisoners to do it. Their greatest weakness wasn't their ships, it was the gap between their pride and their logic. Captain Cavrel's scaled face appeared on a secondary screen. He looked wary, suspicious. He was a survivor, a pragmatist, who had chosen life over a suicidal order. That was the man Rostova needed. Captain Cavrel Rostova began, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This is Admiral Rostova. In just under 3 hours, your Imperium's first guard will arrive in this system. Their orders will be to execute you, your crews, and your former Imperator for the disgrace of your defeat. They will also destroy my fleet and the civilian convoy we are protecting. They are coming to sterilize this entire sector of your failure." Cavrel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, listening. "I am offering you and your crews a choice," Rostova continued. "You can await your execution, or you can participate in a second lesson. One that will be taught not to a mere subjugation fleet, but to the very guards of your emperor." What are you proposing?" Cavrel asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "I am proposing a collaboration," Rostova said. "You know their protocols. You know their command structure. You know their mindset. I have a strategy that can defeat them without a single shot being fired. But it requires your willing participation. The survival of your crews and mine depends on your answer." She was asking him to bet his life on the intelligence of his enemy. Cavrel was silent for a long moment, his reptilian eyes unblinking. He was weighing his options. On one hand, certain death at the hands of his own people. On the other, an alliance with the very enemy who had just humbled him, based on a plan he hadn't even heard yet. But he had seen what this human admiral could do. He had seen her turn his commander's greatest weapon into the instrument of his own defeat. She didn't think like a Cathar, and that he realized was the most powerful weapon in the system. "Tell me your plan," he said. The next 2 hours on the balance were a whirlwind of precise, coordinated activity. Rostova's plan was audacious, a piece of strategic theater on a system-wide scale. It was a trap not of energy or kinetics, but of information and psychology. Lyceum's processors ran at maximum capacity, modeling Cathar command responses and psychological profiles. Commander Lee coordinated with Cavrel and the other Cathar captains who had joined the mutiny. They became reluctant but essential actors in the coming drama. Human engineering teams were shuttled to the crippled Vindicator. They were not there to repair it, but to install high-fidelity broadcast equipment at key locations on the bridge and in the engine room. They worked with a grim efficiency, the hiss of their cutting torches and the glare of their plasma welders echoing in the dead ship's corridors. The disabled Cathar fleet was carefully repositioned, not in a defensive posture, but in a tableau of surrender and repair. Several ships, under the guidance of human engineers, began venting plasma in controlled visible bursts, mimicking catastrophic but salvageable damage. It was a stage, and the entire system was the auditorium. The civilian convoy was ordered to halt its retreat. They took up a new position, nestled protectively behind the main body of the 12th Fleet in plain sight. It was a move of calculated insanity, a declaration that humanity would not abandon its charges nor its prisoners. As the final hour began to count down, a sense of profound calm settled over the bridge of the balance. Every piece was in place. Every actor knew their role. Rostova stood before the main view screen, watching the empty patch of space where the first guard would soon appear. The fate of everyone in the system now rested not on shields or guns, but on a story. "They are here," Sharma announced, her voice steady. A wave of violent tearing energy ripped open the fabric of space-time, and the Cathar First Guard arrived. They were magnificent and terrifying. Their ships were sleeker, larger, and bristling with more weapons than Dexler's fleet had ever dreamed of. Their lead ship, the Dreadnought Retribution, was nearly twice the size of the Vindicator. It was the embodiment of the Imperium's wrath. A harsh, powerful voice crackled across all channels, an open broadcast of pure, undiluted menace. "I am High Executor Valar of the First Imperial Guard. You stand in a contaminated system. The disgraced Third Fleet, the human aggressors and their civilian parasites are hereby sentenced to immediate purification. There will be no negotiation. There will be no surrender. There is only the sentence." This was the ultimatum doctrine in its purest, most final form. Rostova listened to the broadcast without expression. Valar was making the exact same mistake Dexlar had made, assuming his enemy's response was limited to fight or flight. He had delivered his absolute statement. He expected fear, chaos, and then destruction. Rostova did not respond to him directly. Instead, she looked at her communications officer. "Begin the performance." On Valar's bridge, he watched his tactical display, expecting to see the human fleet scatter or mount a futile, suicidal charge. Instead, something utterly baffling happened. A new broadcast began overriding his own. It was a multi-layered information stream piped into every Cathar comm system, from the bridge of the Retribution down to the personal datapads of the lowest-ranking crewmen. It began with a simple damning image, a replay of Dexlar issuing his original ultimatum. Then it showed the full, unedited sensor data of the battle, including the feed from the Janus lattice as it turned the Vindicator's weapon against it. It was an objective, mathematical proof of the Third Fleet's tactical failure. Then came the live feeds. One feed showed the bridge of the Vindicator, where Dexlar sat not in chains, but at a console, his head in his hands, a figure of profound defeat. Another showed Commander Lee's medical teams working alongside Cathar medics on the unflinching will, treating the wounded from both sides. A third feed showed human engineers helping a Cathar crew seal a hull breach on another cruiser. It was a picture not of conquest, but of orderly, humane post-conflict procedure. Their weapon wasn't a beam of light. It was the truth. Finally, a new voice entered the broadcast, calm and measured. It was Captain Cavrel speaking from his own bridge. "This is Captain Cavrel of the cruiser Unflinching Will. To the officers and crew of the First Guard. What you see is the truth of what happened here. We were not defeated by a superior weapon, but by a superior strategy. We were defeated by our own doctrine. The humans have treated us not as prisoners, but as a problem to be solved. They have offered us a choice: annihilation at your hands, or a new understanding." Valar watched in disbelief, his rage mounting. This was an information weapon, a mutiny broadcast across his entire command. "Jam their signals," he roared. "Target their flagship," but it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been sown. The crews of the First Guard were seeing the evidence with their own eyes. They saw the flawless logic of the human's trap. They saw the humane treatment of the surrendered crews, and they heard the testimony of one of their own captains. They were being ordered to slaughter thousands of their own kind to protect the pride of a doctrine that had just been publicly proven to be a catastrophic failure. The Retribution began to power its main weapon. The terrible glow began to form along its spine. On the bridge of the Balance, Lyceum's voice was calm. "The Retribution is preparing to fire on us, Admiral." "Hold your position," Rostova commanded, her eyes locked on the screen. "Trust the math." She was betting everything on the hope that logic was more contagious than fear. As the Retribution's weapon reached its peak charge, a wave of status reports flooded Valar's console. One by one, the other ships in his fleet were reporting that they were not in firing position. They were citing minor, unverifiable engine fluctuations, sensor ghosts, and targeting computer malfunctions. It was a fleet-wide, passive, and perfectly deniable mutiny. The captains of the First Guard, like Cavrel before them, had been presented with a logical truth that was more compelling than their commander's orders. They would not fire on their own people to cover up a simple, tactical truth. Valar stood alone on his bridge, the full, terrible power of his dreadnought, ready to be unleashed, with no one to follow his lead. The trap had closed. He was a commander with no fleet, a voice with no echo. His ultimatum had been met not with defiance but with logic, and it had been utterly and completely dismantled. The open corridor he had seen into the system had become a kill-box of irrefutable truth turned inside out upon his own authority. Their doctrine was a house of cards, and humanity had just blown it over with a whisper of reason. The glow from the Retribution's weapon died. The High Executor of the First Imperial Guard had been rendered impotent without a single shot being fired against him. The system fell into a profound, ringing silence. The second lesson was over. In the aftermath, negotiations were swift and decisive. High Executor Valar was relieved of command by his own subordinates. The combined Cathar fleets, now under the temporary command of the pragmatist Cavrel, formally requested peaceful passage out of the system under Confederation escort. The terms were simple. The events that transpired in the Janus system would be entered into the pan-galactic public ledger, a permanent, unalterable record of interspecies relations. The Cathar Imperium, faced with the undeniable and widely broadcast proof of its doctrine's failure, had no choice but to assent. The Rostova precedent was born. Any ultimatum issued would be considered a formal ceding of strategic initiative to the recipient. The act of threatening absolute destruction was now by galactic law an act of absolute vulnerability. The Cathar ships, the proud subjugation fleet and the terrifying execution fleet, were escorted to the edge of the system by the comparatively tiny 12th Fleet. They departed not as conquerors or punishers, but as students of a hard-learned lesson. The civilian convoy, safe and sound, finally made its jump to their new home. The cost of victory had been 3 wounded sailors on a single frigate and a dangerous expenditure of trust and audacity. It was a price Rostova had been willing to pay. On the bridge of the FCV Balance, a quiet sense of order had returned. The decks hummed with the steady, reassuring vibration of a ship at peace. Rostova stood watching the main view screen, where the last of the Cathar engine signatures faded into the distance. The public ledger, broadcast on a side panel, showed the tally from the Galactic Council, officially ratifying the new precedent. The vote was nearly unanimous. The mirror arrays of the Janus lattice their purpose served received their final command and dissolved their microscopic components, scattering to the solar winds, once again becoming invisible dust. Strength is not the power to issue an ultimatum. It is not the force to compel others to your will. True strength is the clarity to see a better way, the courage to teach it, and the wisdom to build a ledger that ensures the lesson is never forgotten. You do not own a people by putting a collar around their neck. You guide them by showing them a mirror and trusting them to see the truth of their own reflection. Their ultimatum was a question, and our answer was the future.